change-ified. So, exam 2, quizzes part 3, deadline November 16th, end of day. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th, end of day. Exam 5, the end of the normal time for the final. And the paper draft deadline November 9th, plus 5 deadline November 14th, merge deadline November 21st, and of course the desperation deadline December 8th. Before going on to the new stuff, anything about previous stuff?
One question.
Yes.
So for the paper, is there like a specific format or like it doesn't matter?
In terms of like the citation
Yeah. Like,
stuff? No, you can use whatever you normally use for your major, so if you already use MLA or Chicago or APA, that's fine. You don't go like.
And the rough draft we turn in by copy?
Yep, so I can mark it up.
Okay, then the final is online, like we turn it online.
Yep. Okay, before heading on to new stuff, anything about any previous stuff? Or stuff that needs more? Also, since Halloween brought candy from Publix. Also, if you don't like candy, there's also some goldfish as well. And rainbowy goldfish, because you can taste the rainbow. Well, actually, they all taste the same, as far as I know. Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Rene Descartes, talking about his first meditation, and we saw that he's trying to use skepticism as a tool to break skepticism. And so his plan was, if he can find a belief that he cannot doubt, even the most extreme circumstances, that he has that knowledge. And we left him at the end of the first meditation, basically in skeptical freefall. Everything could be put into his mind by the evil demon. He has no idea what seems to be true, but he claims, oddly enough, that he can suspend judgment, that the demon can't make him believe stuff. Now, of course, if he wanted to be more extreme, he could be. So in a way, he ends up in kind of a bit of a quandary. One is, as critics have pointed out, at this point, it seems there's no coming back, because logic and everything is out. So it seemed that once you accept this, there's no way to refute it. So too powerful. On the other hand, critics would say they didn't go far enough because, well, why not keep going and say maybe the evil demon has the power to make you believe stuff? So he says, we can't do that, but why not step it up and say the evil demon can just make you believe things that are totally untrue, that are as if they're true, and so everything that follows could just be a total deceit, in which case there's no beating it at all. So you do. So in a way you can't do to get his job too well. Before pressing on away from Descartes, anything about Descartes that needs more stuff? Now we looked at Descartes again in the free fall of skepticism. So now we turn to attempts that have been made over the centuries to refute the skeptic. Now, what people have typically tried to do, following Descartes, is to try to give an account of how our beliefs are justified, where you can say, aha, we probably believe, or we believe, to try to beat that skeptic. And so the focus has been on justification. As mentioned back in the ancient days at the start of this, that Plato later became known as the justified true belief model, JTB. That you know it when you believe it, that it's true, and you've got an adequate justification. And so epistemologists, for the most, by and large, focused on justification. But of course, we end up in, as we saw, a regress problem, which is this. If you accept that a belief has to be justified, justified true belief, then typically you justify your belief by another belief. So, for example, take something really basic, like believing today is Wednesday. And if someone said, how do you know it's Wednesday? And you'd say, well, look at my phone and the calendar says Wednesday. I talk to other people, they say Wednesday. Look at the TV or the news, Wednesday. And I remember yesterday being Tuesday. But of course, these are all just more beliefs. And so the question would be, what justifies, if you say, well, my calendar says it's Wednesday, and someone says, how do you know your calendar is accurate? And you say, well, other people are talking about Wednesday. How do you know they're not being deceived by their own calendar? I seem to remember yesterday being Tuesday. How do you know your memory wasn't tampered with? And so you can always give, a question about the justification, which means you get off on this infinite regress. So the challenge is, how do you stop that and say, here's a belief that is true, justified, but I don't need to justify it, the justification of that belief. It's somehow, the regress stops. Now, historically, people have tried the following stuff. And people keep trying stuff, because people don't give up. Except when they do. Now, one approach was taken by our good dead friend, Wittgenstein. He was a famous philosopher, pretty strange. He famously told his students that philosophy was over with because he basically won it, and told them to go and get jobs in like a factory. And one of his students, who was ill-suited for a job in a metalworking factory, got a job and got killed. So, oops. No, he didn't actually directly kill him, but kind of indirectly. Now, Wittgenstein said this. Basically, there is no justified foundation. We infer belief A from B. B isn't justified, so, behind every belief is an unjustified belief. And of course, that really just kind of restates the problem rather than solving it. And so problem still remains. Second option, also not very popular, is doing what in philosophy is known as biting the bullet. And I think I mentioned this before, but the expression comes from back before they had anesthesia, and if someone was wounded, injured, like on the battlefield or like in the Wild West, shot, they would take a bullet and bite on it. And the idea is actually a sound one. One is, of course, they found that the mind can only pay attention to so much at any given time. So if something distracts you when you're in pain, you feel less pain. For example, music and video games can both reduce pain. Not because you hurt less, but because you're focusing on something else. So if you ever heard it, turn on the music you like. You'll hurt less. It's true. And so biting on the bullet focuses some of the tension away from the pain. Also, if you're biting on something, it's hard to scream, so you're not scaring and frightening other people by screaming. Now, in philosophy, to bite the bullet is not designed like when someone gets hurt philosophically. It's to simply take the pain, to accept something that seems like it's really bad philosophically, and to say, okay, I accept this, and embrace it. So the basic idea is to bite the bullet is to say, yes, I recognize this is pretty bad, but I'm just going to accept it and tough it out through the pain. And so toughing it out here involves saying, well, yeah, A is justified by B, B by C, C by D, to infinity. And that's just the way it goes. You get an infinite regress, but we have an infinite regress chain, but it's still justified. Now, of course, the obvious problem is, to make this work, we'd have to have a mind capable of infinite belief, which we don't. So that doesn't work either. Now, because of this, there are really two main sort of solutions that have some plausibility, that don't instantly kind of collapse. And they were, probably still are, two of the big dogs of epistemology. First one is coherentism, second one, foundationalism. Coherentism is, we'll look at it in more detail in a bit, but the basic idea is you justify things by their coherence. A is justified by B, B by C, which is justified by A. Now, that of course seems to run in a circle for the reason that it runs in a circle. But the idea, as we'll see in a bit, is that somehow if they fit together right, it's not circular, it's somehow like mutually supported. And somehow it works. And we'll see a case for it in a bit. So one option is when beliefs cohere, that solves the problem. So if all your beliefs cohere with each other, then they're justified, so you can know stuff.
So they're not saying it's not a circular regress?
Yeah, that's what critics say. The critics say, well, if you run it in a circle, it's a circular regress, so if A is justified by B, B by C is justified by A, if you have doubts about A, then it's going to affect the whole thing. Yeah, there'll be a circular regress. And the coherentists say, no, it works, coherence solves it. It's not a circular regress, it's like a coherent support, or so they claim, but they're probably wrong. Now the other one, the oldest and perhaps biggest dog of epistemology, is foundationalism. And the idea here is that you have A is justified by B, which ultimately is justified by a foundational belief. So any belief you got that's justified is either a belief in the foundation that's just somehow, however the system works, it is foundationally justified, or you can trace the chain of inference back to that foundation. So you could kind of use an analogy to like legitimate authority. So for example, I can't give people speeding tickets because why not? Yeah, I don't have the authority. And the difference is, of course, if you have someone who's actually a police officer, you can trace their authority back, and it goes to the state. So if someone you got authority either because they've been given authority by someone in authority, or somehow they just have authority. And similar to the foundational, the idea is that there's a foundational beliefs, and any belief you got, either you can trace back to a belief that's foundational, and different foundationalists have different views, or it's foundational. It just is somehow self-justified. And again, this is the oldest and biggest dog of epistemology. So, in more detail, what is foundationalism? Well, the basic idea, again, if you're a foundationalist, it does have some appeal, is that there are beliefs that are somehow self-justified or self-evident. A good example of this is, Plato. He claims that the forms, they stop. You know them, and you don't have to justify your belief in them. The forms just stop the regress. How do you know? Well, you hang out with the forms, and you know the forms. Other thinkers have, innate ideas. The idea being that these are built in, and they're somehow just self-evidently true. Aristotle, Plato's student, and Aquinas, who comes long after Aristotle but borrows heavily from him, adopt a similar view, namely that there are basic truths, and for Aquinas, there's truth where you just know the truth in itself. It's either the truth, or you get it through reason. So it's either foundational or supported by the foundation. So this one, again, it's got a long pedigree going back to Plato. Now, the most famous foundationalist of all is, of course, our good dead friend Descartes, and it's called classical or Cartesian foundationalism. And the idea is this. The central type of claim is that to make it work, we have to have infallible, which means we can never somehow be wrong, and it's got to be non-inferential. In other words, you don't go through a series of steps to get to it, you just see the truth, and you can't be wrong about it. So there are two types of beliefs for this foundationalism. There are what modern epistemologists call basic. Not like in an insulting sense, but kind of like in the positive sense. They're the basic things in a good way. And everything else is inferred. So there are the properly basic beliefs, which are the foundation. And the truth of those, you just somehow see it, however that works. And then the non-basic ones are somehow justified by the basic ones. And it's an asymmetrical relationship, because the basic ones justify the non-basic, but the non-basic don't justify the basic. So justification goes one way. Now, it's tempting, of course, to draw this as kind of like a pyramid, because it's got a strong foundation, but actually it looks like a reverse pyramid, because the foundational beliefs are relatively few. I guess it'd be kind of a pyramid with a flat top. And then you expand outward from that. So as a building, this would be terrible, because it would tend to fall over. But the idea being that this provides a foundation, and then we build more and more upon it. Or so they claim. Now, when he last left Descartes, he was doing his Descartes stuff. Namely, he looked upon the structure of philosophy and science, and from the distance it looked like a massive shining edifice. But then as he got closer, he realized it was all ramshackle and rusted and decayed and built on a foundation full of cracks, resting on sand. So what he did essentially is just bulldoze it off a cliff, and then started digging to find a rock-solid foundation upon which to build a new edifice. And when he left him, he had basically destroyed everything. So he's free-floating, saying, I can doubt everything. You know, that there is no world, that mathematics is in doubt, geometry is in doubt, everything is in doubt. But he claims there's one thing he can't doubt. So what does he get to that he says is indubitable? Oh, it's a famous Cartesian cogito ergo sum. I think I sometimes feel I'll put it in a therefore. And so Descartes thinks the one thing you can't doubt that basically becomes the safety net or foundation he lands on is, I think, I am. So he thinks that whatever he thinks, he knows he is, and he can't doubt that. Because to try to doubt it, to say, I don't exist, would be to refute the claim. And to say I exist proves the claim. So he thinks that's one thing he can't doubt. So, to use kind of a metaphor, it's like he's been falling in the darkness, and he lands like in a single solid spot. But of course, by itself, you know, I exist, that really doesn't do a whole bunch. So he needs more stuff. He has to build from that. So what does he do? Well, over the course of 5 more meditations, he infers, tries to prove God's existence. So he goes through the meditations, trying to establish that God exists. Roughly, he infers that since he exists, then that's something with certainty. So he starts looking for something more certain, and he claims that he has an idea of God. So the question then is, where does this idea come from? And he says, it could, basically the options are, it comes from him, in which case there is no God, there's only him, or it comes from something outside of him, in which case there's something else. Now, he argues that it can't possibly come from him. He can't get his idea of God from himself. So it has to come from the outside. But then the question is what's out there God? And he argues that, yeah, it's got to be God. So he concludes that God has to exist, because otherwise he wouldn't have the idea of God. And he makes a lot more arguments, but the ultimate result is he claims God exists. Then his next step is he wonders, is God good or bad? And he says, well, God is good, because being bad means that you'd be lacking in something. You know, he thinks nothing would be bad if it was perfect. It's only, the only things that lack stuff are evil. So he concludes that God is benevolent, God is good, and doesn't deceive him. So in a way he's back to where we started. So God is good, not a deceiver. So then, how does that solve the problems? Well, he thinks what he can infer then is this. Because the problem he began with was, how can I know that what I'm experiencing is real? Because the senses have deceived him. How can he trust the senses? Well, he says normally what we see is real because our perceptual mechanisms are made by God, and God is not a deceiver. So in general, what we perceive is real. But of course, Descartes runs into the obvious problem. As he himself argued, we're not always right. So he claims that in the case of abnormal circumstances, we can get things wrong, but we're generally right. So empirical judgments can be trusted, but he runs into a problem here as well, because inductive beliefs, empirical beliefs, are only beliefs. We can't be certain. So in a way, we're kind of back where we started with, you still don't know for sure if what you're experiencing is real, is for sure. And Descartes doesn't solve that. He basically says, yeah, it's probably real. But he thinks that there are these indubitable basic principles. He thinks through deduction, you can get like knowledge. Now, the problem he runs into is this. Now, if he had succeeded, we'd just say, epistemology would say, look, Descartes solved the problem. We can be certain about this. This is how we know everything. Yay, Descartes, we know all the things. Thank you, Descartes. Here are all the things. But obviously it didn't work. So why didn't it work? Well, one of the main reasons is, like the way I drew it here, is nicely illustrates the beliefs that are foundational, pretty limited. Why? Well, because the only things that can be here, they have to be infallible. I mean, you can't be wrong. No possibility. Also, what are called incorrigible. Now, sometimes we talk about, people being incorrigible, and if they're bad, you can never make them not bad. But incorrigible in this case doesn't mean like bad beliefs. It means beliefs that you can't be wrong about, in a way. For example, one belief that is often presented as incorrigible is the belief that you're feeling pain. Now, you can be wrong about being injured or not. You could be, in error about like what's supposedly causing the pain. But if you feel pain and believe you're in pain, you can't be wrong. You should be like, if you're in pain, that's all there is to it. You could be wrong about the cause, you could be wrong about being hurt, you could be wrong about how serious it is. But if you feel pain and you believe you're in pain, you're right. Now again, you can be wrong about some aspects of it. For example, my biology and anatomy physiology teacher, he always had a story for like every horrible condition, and there's always like, yeah, this guy did this, and like, oh my god. And he was talking once about the effects of how people can be deceived about cold and heat. And he gave the example of when he was in a fraternity, they would initiate people, they'd show them like a branding iron and heating it up, and what they'd actually do is have another one stuck in a bucket of ice water. And they would touch them with the ice, the freezing cold one, and they'd scream like they were being branded. And of course, if you ever put your hands on like really cold water, it can feel like it's burning. Or likewise, really hot water can feel kind of like, because the pain is basically the same. Yeah, so a person could be wrong. They may think they were branded when they weren't, but they're not wrong about the pain. They're wrong about like what caused it, but they're like, yeah, I'm in pain. They can't be wrong. And so the idea would be is that those kind of beliefs, I'm in pain, I'm happy and I know it, anything you can't be wrong about could be in there. But the problem is, there's so little that we would actually know. You know, like you're in pain, and you know things that could not be possibly be doubted. And so critics have said, there's just not enough self-evident truths to build enough knowledge. Like Descartes' kind of initial promise was, yeah, we can prove everything deductively, be certain about everything. But it ends up with, you can be sure you exist, you feel pain, but then everything else is still up for doubt. So, on one hand, I guess it's better than nothing, a little bit maybe, but still it's not what was promised. So we don't really know all this stuff, we just know that stuff. So, not as promised. Now even there's still room for doubt to sneak in. For example, Descartes, showed like, well, they can't trust logic or math, so that's it. And people have argued that you could be wrong about being in pain. You could be deceived about that. That one seems kind of hard to doubt. But you take something like when people aren't sure whether they're in love or not. They're like, No, I'm not sure. They're feeling something, but they're not sure exactly what it is. And maybe pain can be the same way. Maybe people aren't sure they're actually, maybe they're just feeling mildly discomforted or something. So maybe they could be wrong. So maybe that we don't have any knowledge, given that high requirement, any knowledge at all. So this problem can be presented in the following way. Ironically, the requirements for knowledge are too strict, too high. Because what he wants to do is beat the skeptic. So his idea, his plan is a decent one. Find something that cannot be doubted, that's absolutely certain, and yeah, the skeptic is defeated. Here is something absolutely certain. But the problem is if we set that requirement, we don't seem to find much, if anything, that can meet that requirement. Now, to use an analogy, suppose you're creating a new startup, and you wanted to have the greatest startup, the greatest business of all, and you required that anyone who applied for the job have at least 3 PhDs, a Nobel Prize, and a gold medal, or maybe like an all-American status in a sport. Because you need employees that can like really hang in there like long hours. So you want people who are elite athletes, super smart, etc. Now, if you got those people, you'd have really great employees. But how many of those people are you going to find? Maybe none. Yeah, there's not a lot of gold medal, Nobel Prize, triple PhD people out there. Yeah, so if you got them, it'd be great, but you're probably not going to get it. And so the problem is that the standard is so high, you're not going to get anything that meets it. Just like if a person's setting up to hire someone and they set these impossibly high requirements, yeah, if they got somebody, it'd be great, but they're not going to get many or anybody. So it's kind of ended up defeating itself. A second class of problem is that our empirical beliefs on this view can't be knowledge. So all of physical sciences, again, they're in trouble. You can't say that we know this stuff. And the irony is, by trying to beat skepticism, it ends up in a way making skepticism easier. Because the skeptic can say, oh, if it's not certain, you don't know it. You can't be certain about all this stuff, so you can't know. So in a way, the foundationalist hands the skeptic another tool, because the foundationalist of this sort says, absolutely certain you don't know. And the skeptic says, great, what are we absolutely certain about? Nothing. So skepticism comes into play. And so classical foundationalism fails. Now, on one hand, of course, it seems to be the only possible solution because you got to stop the regress. You got to know something that can't be doubted, but then it seems to be not possible. Now, in reply to this, people, of course, didn't give up. They said, okay, maybe we can fix this. It's kind of like when Coca-Cola sales were dropping off. They say, hey, let's go with New Coke, which was a disaster for a while. The biggest, really huge, but then Coca-Cola came back by adding back their secret ingredient of cocaine. People really loved. That's not true. That's not true. But that was the original.
I thought it was a Pepsi.
No, Coke.
Oh, okay.
Yep. They had cocaine. What's funny is that the when it first came out, cocaine was legal, and during Prohibition, it was the alcohol in Coca-Cola. Because once it contained alcohol, that was illegal. So cocaine was fine, but alcohol was illegal. Prohibition, weird stuff. So the solution was New Coke, or in this case, moderate foundationalism. So the idea was, okay, if the problem is the standards are too strict, so we're not going to get any knowledge, or we open the door to the skeptic by saying, placing these impossible standards. So they said, okay, the way to solve that is we'll keep the foundationalism, because that seems to be what we need. We need something that we know. But if this strong foundationalism gets us in trouble, let's make it a little weaker. To use an analogy, if someone has a startup and they have like that, must have 3 PhDs, Nobel Prize, gold medal, and no one sends in a resume, the solution is, well, you lower the standards. like Homer Simpson said, you know, the secret to happiness is lowered expectations. They keep pushing them down until finally somebody shows up. So, how do they do this? Well, one of the things that got classical foundationalism in trouble was that it required infallibility, that one could not be wrong. And so they reject that. You could be wrong. So they embrace instead fallibilism, which is the opposite of infallibility, which is fabulism is you could be wrong. Now, like classic foundationalism, it's still asymmetrical. The foundation justifies the higher up stuff, not vice versa. Unlike classical foundationalism, you could have doubts about psychological beliefs, about being happy or being in pain. And there were no special, you know, magical beliefs. I shouldn't say magical. There's no like really special beliefs, a special category of self-evident beliefs. Almost any belief can count as basic. So you don't need like these, I guess, elite, you know, upper class, you know, East Coast beliefs, or West Coast, depending on which coast you hate the most. Now, the relationship is one of justification. Also, they allowed in, instead of just deduction, like Descartes used, they also allow induction in there, and also a role for coherence, for things fitting together. So again, their solution was, you know, crudely put, the key to happiness or success is lowered expectations. So that way at least you get some things in there. How'd this work out? Well, this is also sadly and tragically doomed. Oh, one other thing I did is, one debate in epistemology is, if you have a justification, is it good enough that you have the justification even though you have no idea about it? You're right, you believe it, and there is a justification, you just don't know what it is. Or do you have to be able to, kind of like a badge, show that you've got it? And epistemologists have debated about that, whether you can just be justified and not be aware of your justification, or whether you've got to know that you are justified and know. You have to, in other words, know that you know, or can you just know? And the moderate foundationalists say, you just have to know, you don't have to know that you know, or know that you know that you know. So did this solve the problem? And the answer again is, well, no, because if it did, I'd just say, moderate foundationalism, solve the problem, here you go. Next. Now, ironically, the problem was that by weakening in response to the problem of strong foundationalism, it wasn't strong enough. It became too weak. To go with the employee metaphor, it's kind of like if you had a company where the first requirements were, 3 PhDs, gold medal, Nobel Prize, and then it was just, you get a pause. It's like, true, you get a lot of people, but it's not going to be that good. So it was too weak to reply to the skeptic, because the skeptic, going back to the features, it's basically like a field day for the skeptic, because they would say, well, look right here. You could be wrong, and that's all the skeptic needs. That could be wrong. Also, doubts, well, it's all the skeptic needs. Induction, well, that's the problem with induction. You can always, no matter how good your inductive argument is, you can always be wrong. And so the skeptic doesn't even have to argue. They just have to point to what this is and just say, doubt. You could be wrong. The modern foundationalists is literally doing their job for them. They just have to, the only thing they have to do is just point and say doubt, and their job is done. Yeah, so the skeptic, in this case, ironically, the standards are so low that the skeptic really can't be beat. Now it does address the criticisms of classic foundationalism, but it ends up actually being kind of worse. So we end up in a way having no knowledge at all. Also, there's bringing in coherentism also creates a problem. So it seemed that foundationalism, as of now, seemed like the most plausible possibility, but didn't work. Now the foundationalists, though, they do have the appeal to them is, well, they both have two appeals, or each have their own appeal. With a classic one, it's kind of like we need really high standards, and if we can meet those, then we know. We beat the skeptic because they can't get their skepticism in there. But if we accept that super high standard, then we don't seem to find anything that meets it. Then if we lower the standard, we'd say, okay, we lower the standard for knowledge so that we know stuff. The skeptic can't say we don't know. Then the skeptic just says, oh, the standards are terrible. So you don't really know. So in a way, it's kind of a paradox. High standards, you get nothing. Low standards, well, it's not any good. And people are still trying to work that out. Before pressing on, anything about that needs more stuff. Now, the other big opposing camp are the coherentists. And they're still around today. And again, sort of the two, for contemporary modern epistemology, those are kind of the two big camps, foundationalism, coherentism. And there are also some naturalists and others as well, but these were the big ones. Now, the first coherentists, the classics, their belief is this. Instead of the view that truth is a matter of a foundation, that is a matter of coherence. So the basic idea is that truth resides in the system of knowledge. The classic ones took the following view. Now, our kind of common sense view about truth is that when we say something true, that our claim, our proposition, corresponds to or matches reality. So if I make the proposition, the claim, the backpack is on the table, it's true when my proposition, the backpack is on the table, matches reality. It's called the correspondence theory of truth. Now the coherentists reject that. They say that's not how truth works. It's not like our words corresponding to reality. They define truth in terms of wholes, of all the parts, connecting together. And the idea is that it's the relation between the claims that supply the truthiness. So instead of this model, claim matching, object, the idea is that all the different claims, they're all kind of coherent together. That's what makes it true. I mean, to use an analogy, it's kind of like with a narrative. If someone's telling a story, and they're telling a story of, say, the past, and you can't go and check, what you do is you look at, do all the bits of the story fit together? And you look at the coherence of the narrative. Is it a coherent narrative? If the narrative is incoherent and like parts of it contradict each other, then you say that all can't be true. But if it all fits together, you might be more inclined to say that it's true. Now in the 20th and 21st century, it's weird to think we're in the 21st century because you're expecting, like moon bases and cool stuff, and all we got was Facebook. So disappointing. No one predicted Facebook. Everyone was predicting moon bases and space travel and underwater cities. But I guess Facebook is good enough. It's way cooler than vacationing on the moon or under the ocean. Oh, Silicon Valley, such a disappointment. Now, among these were this fellow Quine, Sellers, Harman, Lehrer, Bonjour. Met a couple of these guys. I think most of them are, I know he's dead. I think some of the other ones are dead. He might still be alive. He wasn't, he's probably still alive. They say the coherence theory of truth is out. Instead, they embrace a theory of justification. And that's kind of a subtle difference, but to them it makes a big difference. So they're not talking about this, theory of truth is coherence. Their approach is coherence is justification. And they would argue a lot about that. So their view, which has a certain appeal, is this. Any belief you got, we don't talk about it being true, we talk about it being justified in this case by the entire system of beliefs, how it fits the narrative, to go back to the story metaphor. So we'd say that a particular belief is justified if you put it into the big story, the narrative, and it coheres. And again, just like going back to the story metaphor, if someone's telling a story and parts of it contradict each other, we'd say, well, there's gotta be something wrong with those claims. There's gotta be something mistaken in there. In this case, the coherentist would say, well, one of those beliefs has gotta be unjustified. And so for the coherentist, all justification is based on inferences, how things fit together. Now to try to sell it, show its appeal, it's kind of like the CIS model of justification, or like the lawyer shows, like Matlock or whatever new one there is. And typically when they do like the CIS or law shows, they don't get like the old ones where like the lawyer Matlock would always find somebody they confess at the end, like I was the killer. But with murder, like think of like a murder mystery or crime mystery, the idea is you never have someone come out and say for the good mystery, I'm the one that did it. You have all these little pieces of evidence. Like you have the person like lacks an alibi, like the weapon has like one of the prints on it, they had motivation, there was like a witness that claims they saw them about that time, and then you have all the other bits. And the idea is that no one piece is decisive, but they all cohere like a web, a badly drawn web, and they justify the belief that the person is the guilty party. Well, actually, I put that in the center, because that's where the guilt would be. Its idea is they fit together like a web of belief, justifying through coherence that claim. So if this story, the person is guilty, fits all of the other pieces, then that would be a justified claim, and they all connect together. Now, to use a metaphor, foundationalism is like building on earth, because on earth, you build like a solid foundation, and you build your structure on that. Coherentism, to use the metaphor, is like building in space, because in space, there's nothing to build stuff on. Everything, like when they build the space station, there's nothing to like stick it onto, because it's in space. What they do is they connect all the pieces together, and it forms a coherent structure based on how those pieces are bolted together. So metaphorically, coherentism is like a space station. If all the pieces hold together, like you've got a solid coherence. And if they're weak, just like the space station, with bad structure, it would be an unjustified or unsupported belief. Now, on one hand, this does have appeal. It's something we do practically. If we're listening to someone's story and we find that parts of it they contradict each other, like they say they were one place at one time, and then you realize they said they were like in California at 9 a.m., then they were in Tallahassee at 9:30, you'd say, well, there's parts of that don't work. Unless they say, oh, time change. Maybe they could explain it. But and so that part makes sense. We do look for incoherence in people's stories. Now, what's the fatal flaw of coherentism? Well, the doom of coherentism is what's called the isolation objection, which is this. Coherence, consistency, does give us a necessary, condition for knowing that if we have claims and we know them, that means they're true, which means they have to be coherent, because they all have to be able to be true at the same time, because if they're all true, they've got to be able to do that. And so a person who claims to know, like, say 10 things, and they're not consistent with each other, they can be wrong. We don't know which ones they're wrong about automatically, but they can be wrong about some of those. So that part is good. But here's the problem. There can be completely coherent sets of beliefs that are totally untrue. Now, one extreme example would be someone who's like psychotic. Totally, their beliefs could be completely coherent and fit together perfectly, but they could be completely, insane. There are also people who deceive others, and they create, through that deception, completely coherent belief systems, but they're totally not true. There was one on NPR, they were talking about someone whose mother was involved with this person who claimed to have been working for the government. And they would, and they claimed that there was like people out to get him and hence get her family. And he had this amazing story about how there's a place where the government would go and, almost like a comic book thing, they would capture the bad people and put them in this place. And then when good people, you know, had to vanish from the side, they take them like to another part of that place and keep them there. And they had this person convinced that their family had been replaced with duplicates, you know, pretending to be like their family members. And the mother was fully convinced. Now eventually the story fell apart. It's just this amazing story, and they figured out it was totally untrue. But for years the person believed it because it seemed completely, everything was carefully put together and seemed totally coherent. Now one of the best examples is from World War II. And it was a brilliant move on the part of the Allies. What they did is when they were going to do the invasion of France, they obviously didn't want to tell Hitler, like, hey, this is where we're going to show up. So what they did is they created fake armies, and they would have people like, you know, radio things, you know, pretending like they're the army. And they made inflatable tanks and planes and put them up. And one kind of extreme thing they did is they took someone who died, hopefully of natural causes, dressed them as a British officer, you know, clipped a briefcase to them with the invasion plan or invasion plans, and they were really careful because they put, like in their wallet, like all the little bits and pieces that normal people would accumulate. They put in like his coat pocket a letter from his bank that he was overdrafted on his account, so it seemed just totally coherent. And then dumped the body overboard off the coast of Spain. The Spanish, who were neutral but friendly to the Germans, found the plans, and of course sent them off to the Germans. And so the Nazis were completely deceived because everything was coherent and they were totally wrong. And so sort of ironically, before coherence theories even became like a thing, there was like already a fatal example against them, that you could have totally coherent sets of belief that are totally wrong. So the end result is we don't know. No, sort of back where we started. So that's the end of today. If you'd like some Halloween